Ladies and gentlemen, gearheads and connoisseurs of automotive oddities, gather round. I want you to feast your eyes on the rolling sculpture you see before you. It is cream-colored, it is low to the ground, and it looks like a spaceship that decided to disguise itself as a humidor. This, my friends, is the 1954 Hudson Italia. But before we ignite the ignition on this bizarre tale of transatlantic chaos and Detroit desperation, do me a massive favor. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell. If you don't, I might just have to come over there and replace your modern car seats with the unpadded wooden benches from a 1920s buckboard wagon. You don't want that, and neither does your chiropractor. So, let's get into it. Now, you might be looking at this thing and thinking, what in the wild world of sports is that? And that is the correct reaction. The Hudson Italia is what happens when a desperate American car company from Detroit has a midlife crisis, drains its bank account, flies to Milan, drinks 3 bottles of Chianti, and decides to reinvent itself as a supermodel. It is a car born out of panic, crafted by artists, powered by a tractor engine, and sold to absolutely nobody. And it is glorious. To understand why this car exists, we have to travel back to the early 1950s. Hudson was a legendary company. They gave us the step-down Hudson, the Hornet, the car that dominated NASCAR before NASCAR was just giant billboards driving in circles. But by 1953, Hudson was in trouble, big trouble. Ford and GM were cranking out V8 engines and modern styling, and Hudson was still selling a car that looked like an overturned bathtub. They needed a halo car. You know, a car that acts like a neon sign, bringing people into the showroom to drool, even if they eventually just buy the cheap compact sedan because their wife said no to the sports car. Enter Frank Spring. Frank was Hudson's chief designer, and Frank was a man with taste who was trapped in a world of boring metal. He was tired of designing heavy American steel. He looked at the Europeans, Jaguar, Ferrari, Aston Martin, and he said, "I want some of that." But Hudson didn't have the money to build a new factory or stamp new body panels. They were broke. Their pockets were full of lint and grand ambitions. So Frank Spring came up with a plan that was roughly as logical as trying to mail a letter to the moon using a pigeon. Here was the plan. Take the Hudson Jet, which was their boring, compact economy car that nobody liked and looked vaguely like a toaster on wheels, and ship the chassis, the engine, and the transmission on a boat, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to Milan, Italy. There, a famous coach builder called Carrozzeria Touring would throw away the boring body, hand-beat aluminum sheets into a sexy new shape, bolt it all together, and ship the finished car all the way back to America. If you know anything about logistics or economics, you are currently screaming in horror. This was the most inefficient supply chain in the history of the automobile. It's like flying a ham sandwich to Paris just to have the crusts cut off and then flying it back for lunch. The shipping costs alone were enough to make an accountant weep openly in the boardroom. But oh, look at the result. Carrozzeria Touring was famous for a construction method called Superleggero, which is Italian for super light. It involved wrapping aluminum skin over a delicate framework of thin steel tubes. This is the same company that built the Aston Martin DB5 for James Bond. So in a weird way, this Hudson is the American cousin of the Bond car, just with less machine guns and more Midwestern humility. Let's talk about the design, because Frank Spring went absolutely bonkers. Look at the front of this thing. The bumper isn't a flat bar. It's an inverted V shape in the center, looking like an angry mustache or a very confused duck. It gives the car a face that says, "I am better than you, but I'm also confused about where I am." And then look above the headlights. You see those massive scoops cut into the fenders? They look like jet intakes. You'd think they're cooling the brakes, right? Or maybe feeding air to the carburetor. No, they channel air into the interior vents to cool your feet. That's right, this car has aggressive aerodynamics designed specifically to prevent sweaty toes. That is the kind of priority I can get behind. Walk around to the side and you'll notice it sits incredibly low. It's actually 10 inches lower than the standard Hudson. It's so low that if you sat on the curb, you'd be looking the driver in the eye. Because of this, getting in and out would have been a gymnastic event. So Frank Spring cut the doors almost a foot into the roof. When you open the door, a chunk of the roof comes with it, allowing you to enter without knocking your fedora off. It's a brilliant solution to a problem they created for themselves. And then we get to the back. Oh, the back. This is where the 1950s jet age obsession really takes over. Look at the taillights in the image. They aren't just slapped on the fender. They are 3 individual red lenses stacked inside chrome tubes that are embedded into the rear fender. They look like the exhaust ports of a rocket ship. In fact, on the original prototype, these actually were the exhaust pipes. But then someone realized that having hot exhaust gas melting the taillight plastic and filling the trunk with carbon monoxide was a liability lawsuit waiting to happen. So they moved the exhaust down and just kept the lights in the tubes. It's style over substance, and it is beautiful. So who drove this thing? Well, statistically speaking, nobody. Hudson planned to build huge numbers, but because of the insane shipping costs and the handmade labor, the price tag was astronomical. In 1954, a Hudson Italia cost about $4,800. To put that in perspective, a brand new Corvette was $3,500. A Cadillac Coupe de Ville, the king of the road, was $3,800. You could buy a very nice house for $4,800. So the only people who bought the Hudson Italia were eccentric millionaires, Hudson dealership owners who were forced to buy one by corporate, and, well, that's about it. They made exactly 26 of them. That's it, 26. It's funny to imagine the typical buyer. This wasn't a car for the hot rodder kid, he bought a Ford. It wasn't for the banker, he bought a Lincoln. The Italia was for the guy who wore a velvet smoking jacket to the grocery store. He was for the person who wanted everyone to look at them but didn't want to go fast. And that brings us to the performance. You see, despite looking like it could do 200 miles per hour on the Mulsanne Straight at Le Mans, the Italia was writing checks its engine couldn't cash. Underneath that gorgeous, hand-hammered Italian aluminum skin lived the heart of a Hudson Jet. It was a 202 cubic inch inline-6 flathead. Now, Hudson tried to jazz it up. They gave it the legendary twin H-power treatment. This sounds like a nuclear propulsion system, but it really just meant they bolted 2 carburetors onto the engine instead of 1 and painted the air cleaners red. It produced roughly 114 horsepower. To be fair, because the car was made of aluminum and super light tubes, it only weighed about 2,700 pounds, so it wasn't a total slug. It could do 0 to 60 in about eventually, but the driving experience wasn't about speed, it was about cruising. It was a grand tourist in the truest sense. The interior was just as wild as the exterior. Since you can see inside the windows of the car in the image, imagine sitting in there. The seats were bucket seats, which was rare for 1954 America, and they were designed with anatomical foam rubber. They were actually designed by a doctor to be better for your back. They were upholstered in red and white leather to match the flamboyant exterior. The dashboard had no glove box. Why? Because Frank Spring thought glove boxes just collected junk like old receipts and half-eaten candy bars, so he deleted it. Instead, you got a confused layout of gauges and a radio that looked like it was stolen from a ham radio operator's basement. One of the funniest details about how this car was made involves the lack of communication between Detroit and Milan. The Italian workers at Touring were used to building Ferraris and Alfa Romeos. When the Hudson chassis arrived, they were reportedly baffled by the crude American engineering. "Mamma mia," they probably said. "Where are the disc brakes? What is this suspension made of? Cheese? Why is the steering wheel the size of a pizza?" But they did their best. They welded, they hammered, and they crafted. The fit and finish were spectacular on the outside, even if the electrical system was a terrifying mix of American 6-volt logic and Italian optimism. There is a tragic comedy to the Italia's timing. It was released in 1954. In that same year, Hudson ran out of money and merged with Nash to form American Motors Corporation, or AMC. The new bosses at AMC looked at the Italia, looked at the bill for shipping cars back and forth to Italy, laughed hysterically, and immediately canceled the project. Frank Spring's dream car was dead on arrival. It was the car that killed the company, or at least was the final nail in the coffin. It was a vanity project gone wrong. But looking at it today, specifically this beautiful cream-colored example sitting on those lovely wire wheels with the white wall tires, you can't help but smile. It's a survivor. Most of these cars were lost to time, rust, or confused mechanics who didn't know how to fix a handmade aluminum body. But the ones that survived are now worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's the ultimate irony. The car that nobody wanted in 1954 is now the car everybody wants at the Pebble Beach Concourse of Elegance. So, when you look at the Hudson Italia, don't just see a car. See a brave, foolish, wonderful attempt to bring Italian high fashion to the streets of Detroit. It's a tuxedo worn over work boots. It's a supermodel eating a cheeseburger. It is weird, it is rare, and it is undeniably cool. It reminds us of a time when car designers were allowed to dream big, even if the accountants were crying in the corner. And really, isn't that what we want from a classic car? We don't want sensible, we want a story. And the Hudson Italia is one heck of a story wrapped in aluminum and white wall tires. Thanks for reading, and seriously, don't forget to subscribe or I'm mailing you a carburetor that doesn't work.